Dive into the tech world with Brian Childress, a dynamic fractional chief technology officer known for turning software challenges into triumphs. So, Brian, could you share with us what being a fractional CTO entails and why this role is becoming increasingly important in today's tech centric business world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of businesses now are either they consider themselves tech businesses or at least they're very tech enabled. So technology really runs so much of our day-to-day lives, the businesses that we interact with and in the ways that we live. And so needing more and more expertise in technology is something that a lot of businesses are really demanding. And so I think for me as a seasoned technologist, it's and as a fractional CTO, it's my opportunity to now bring years and years of experience and expertise to an organization that may not need somebody in a full-time capacity. And so really that's where we think about fractional that kind of comes into play is you're getting the same level of experience and expertise, but for a fraction of the time. So it's not necessarily like a part time or something along those lines. It's really, we're trying to bring as much experience and really move the business forward in a way that makes sense. And it's really for a fraction of the cost of bringing somebody in full time.
Definitely, I think it it's definitely useful to have a seasoned technologist guide your business. So, do you have any examples of a business that you have guided that have achieved some significant results?
Yeah, quite a few. Commonly, what we see is, let's say a business is trying to develop their own custom software. And so
Mhm.
they go out and they hire a freelancer or a development agency to start to build that software. And a few things could happen. The software that's being built is not high quality, right? There are a lot of issues. There's a lot of instability in the software. Customers are complaining, customers are leaving the platform. I'm working with a team right now where they're seeing a lot of churn from their customers because of the instability of the platform, because of inconsistency in the data. And the development team that has been hired, they're fantastic, but they are struggling to see where the issues lie. And so someone with both an outside perspective and seasoned technologist with lots of years of experience, I can come in and really see what are the issues that we need to start to address. And I'm bringing that fresh perspective. And really, in a matter of really a couple hours of meeting with the team, really understanding the problem, have really been able to turn things around. We've created new infrastructure. We've made updates to the application platform and processes and procedures. All of that has been turned around in the matter of just a few hours of working with the team.
Wow, that's very impressive because yeah, I also think that an outside perspective is very useful, especially like when if you stare too closely at the problem, sometimes it's just not a good idea, right? And yeah, and having you come in and the fact that you're able to solve that within a few hours is like it's it's great because these businesses they could seriously continue with the same problems for like years, and if they don't have someone coming in to help, they'll be losing a lot of money.
Oh, absolutely. The statistic I typically use is somewhere around 70% of software projects fail. They either never make it to the world or they fail quickly after. And I don't like to see that. And anytime I have an opportunity to work with the team and try and turn things around, I absolutely will.
That's excellent. So, drawing from your background in software engineering and cybersecurity, what's a common technical mistake that you see in startups and SMBs?
I there's a so there's quite a few. I think one of the most common mistakes that I see happening is there's either an over complex architecture that's created because, there's a perception that we're going to spend a lot of money on development, a lot of time in creating this thing. Let's build it right the first time. Let's build it for scale, right? We're going to be huge. This is a monumental thing. We're, changing the world and the way it operates. And so we build something that's so complex that it's really hard to understand. It's hard for new engineers to come on board and help to develop. And it's really it may or may not be actually what customers are looking for. And a lot of times we build something too complex that hasn't really been validated with our customers. And so I always encourage my teams to just really focus on what is the most simple solution, right? We can always make things a little bit faster in the future, but if we never get out in front of our customers, then we'll never have an opportunity to do that. Another one, a lot around security is really a big concern and an area that I focus in as well. And so we're collecting a lot of data. We are manipulating that data in certain ways, but we're not really putting good measures and controls in place for making sure that the right person is accessing the right data at the right time. In a lot of companies, it's really easy for another company to buy a subscription to a new platform and start to just send tons and tons of data to this new platform that may or may not have those great security practices in place. And this is when we're hearing about security breaches and our email addresses ending up on whatever the dark web is. All of those sorts of things are happening because both businesses that are integrating with the software and the businesses that are creating software don't have great security measures in place. So there's a few different examples that I see most often.
Definitely. I think what you said about how we should build just like the minimum viable product first, because I think that is a huge common mistake with startups and businesses. And they think that they're gonna make it like, and then just keep developing for a year, and then they bring it out, and the customers, hey, we don't want that, and they go back in, and they're like, what do we do now?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and also what you said with cybersecurity, I think it's very important to have these measures in right at the beginning, because if customers are trusting you with their data, like you should probably take care of it. And also, I'm very curious, what do you think is like the most important security measure that you would be putting in place? If you just had to pick one, which one would you pick?
Really, it's around authentication and authorization. That's where I see the
Mhm.
most issues is around making sure that the user is who they say they are and that they're actually authorized to do the thing that they're trying to do, or they're authorized to see the data that we're actually providing to them. That's the area that I see the most issues. And it's really challenging because there aren't tools that can provide an automated way of looking in and determining if how we implemented a solution is actually working and correct. So it really does require a deeper understanding of how should the system operate and have we designed it in a way that we've taken out those common vulnerabilities. And so that's an area I really focus in a lot is just around user authorization because that's a big mistake I see a lot of teams make.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. So, reflecting on your experience, what crucial tech decisions have you observed in the SaaS sector that significantly influence a company's growth trajectory?
I think again, it's around complexity. Teams that are building too complex too early. I think when we're designing an application, when we're looking at the architecture, I always want to focus on what is simple. And I think about when we talk about scaling, so many teams, so many organizations are concerned about scaling. And really, you're going to have 10 users for the first month, the
Exactly.
first year. So scale isn't really that concerning. But for me, I focus on scaling and scalability in three different ways. One is adding users, and that's typically what we think about most. That's fairly easy. There's some good patterns out there. But the areas that I really like to focus on is how can I add more features to the platform or how can I improve existing features? So this kind of comes into like code maintainability and that sort of thing. And then finally, how can I add more developers to the team? So as features are being added, as our user base is growing, we need to add more developers to support the platform. How can I do that in an efficient and effective way so that when I hire a new developer, they can start contributing to the code base within ideally within the first day, if not shorter. So really trying to focus on how can we continue to grow in the right ways. And again, none of that really has anything to do with a new fancy architecture or the new shiny technologies. You can do that with really boring technologies.
Definitely. Yeah, I think code maintainability is really important because If someone comes in and they're going to take way too long trying to understand what's going on, that's a huge waste of time for the team and everyone involved.
And it's very frustrating for that brand new developer to come in and not feel like they can effectively contribute to the code base. I worked with a group a number of months ago, and it was taking on average 6 months for a developer
Six.
to be able to confidently add features to the platform because the platform was just so complex and it was unnecessarily complex. And it was really frustrating. They had a lot of turnover in the organization just because people didn't feel like they were contributing.
Definitely. So, can you share an instance where a startup's smart tech choices directly boosted their business performance?
Yeah, I can think of a few. I won't name any names for contractual reasons. I can think of a few large, well known organizations that made smart technology choices early on. And they just stuck to what does the team know? What technologies is the team effective and able to contribute to? And what are what I think of as boring technologies, right? These are industry leading, battle tested technologies. They aren't new and shiny. It's easy for them to find new developers that can contribute because it's a technology base or a technology stack that's well known within the industry. There's a lot of resources, there's a lot of community around those specific technologies. And because of that, they can grow the team. They can add additional developers from anywhere in the world because it's not this unique set of technologies that are in use. It's just really we're trying to solve a problem. We just happen to be using, software and technology to solve that problem.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Get a tech stack where it's that most people, that a large amount of people know. So it's not too niche and everyone can contribute.
Absolutely.
So, in your view, what foundational cybersecurity measures do startups often overlook, potentially risking their business? I know we just covered that, but maybe a different point.
I think the biggest risk is around
Data.
and data exposure. So we have an opportunity as engineers when we're building the platform to collect a lot of data. And many of us just collect a lot of data, but we don't understand where that data goes. So, for example, one thing that I see quite often is that we might be um, collecting data, even say you have a login functionality in your application. And so your users are passing their username and their password in a request. And some applications might log that information just as a console log or something along those lines. But we don't think about who has access to those logs downstream. Say, for example, if we're logging credentials or other type of very sensitive information, we just print it out to a console log. That then gets sent to our hosting provider, let's say. And now it's exposed, and every developer, if they have even read only access to those logs, they now have access to everybody's username and password, for example, or everybody's social security number, depending on what type of sensitive data we're collecting. It might be completely exposed in plain text in a log somewhere that eventually is going to get pulled in and aggregated. And it's just, we're exposing too much information and data. So I think I encourage engineers and teams to really focus on what data are we collecting and in what ways and for what purpose. Like, what is the reason that I'm collecting this information? Do I need it here? Do I need it in a console log for troubleshooting purposes? But is there other information I can be collecting that can help me troubleshoot, but also keep my customers' data safe and secure?
Definitely. Yeah, I think customer data security is so important because even large companies get hacked, which is incredibly shocking, especially because you wouldn't expect that to happen. But then these things come out all the time and the vulnerabilities are always there. And I really wonder what you think about in terms of how would you secure like a large company's data when there's so many people working on it? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is large companies, I like to think of it like where's the gold? Where's the valuable information? So large companies typically have a large user base, they have a lot of data. So ultimately the target for them is much, much bigger because they're potentially much more valuable. So larger companies have to fight a lot of potential attacks and vulnerabilities. And so it's even more challenging for them to stay up to date. And I've worked in large Fortune 100, Fortune 50 organizations and focused specifically in the cyber and application security space. And it's really important to think about security as a foundational piece. Before we start designing and choosing our technologies and our architecture, we start thinking about the data that we're going to be collecting and how are we going to be securing that data and what information do we need to expose to what users and when. And I think it's really important to just make security that foundational piece, training developers on what are the common security vulnerabilities. I always look to the OWASP top 10. Those are foundational pieces that I expect every engineer to be well aware of and to be thinking about as we're developing and designing software. So I think there's a lot that we can do from an automated standpoint, checking vulnerabilities and continuing to patch our systems and keep things up to date. But there's also a human and an educational component as well. And that can be really difficult to automate. So for large organizations, what I've seen work well is to try and put practices and what I think of as guardrails in place. So we have specific technologies, we have specific dependencies or libraries that we're using. And then from there, engineers can be a bit more creative in how do they solve the problem, but they're a bit restricted in what tools can they use because then we have less that we have to keep aware of the vulnerabilities that might exist out there in the big scary world.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. So like guardrails first, and then you can innovate within those guardrails.
And it that has an additional benefit too, is because then developers don't have to make those decisions. They may complain that they don't get to make those decisions or use those cool technologies. But really having those constraints also helps developers to stay focused on what is the problem that we're solving, not how do I solve this problem and use this new technology that I don't understand. So it does have some benefits, both from a security perspective, but also from a maintainability and business performance standpoint as well.
Definitely. So how do you advise startups to maintain a balance between innovation and technical solidity without compromising either?
So I think it is important to give some ability to innovate, right? As engineers, that's the thing that I think most of us really gravitate to and why we get into technology and why we stay excited about technology is because we can play with these new cool things all the time. And that innovation is great. And I want to continue to encourage and inspire it. But we also have to be a bit more restrictive because if we adopt a brand new technology into the organization and that technology ends up not being as popular as we think and it fades away, now we have this dependency, this debt, this liability within our system. So for me, I like to find ways that we can innovate again within some guardrails. So not even it doesn't have to pertain to large enterprise organizations, even at startups. What are our how can we restrict ourselves so that we have a maintainable application, but we can also innovate within there. So I like to use maybe the rule of one. So if we're creating a new application, what is the one new thing that we can introduce into it? And that could be the new technology that's the differentiator. Let's bring in one thing. That's the thing that the team needs to learn. They don't need to learn an entirely different tech stack than what they're used to and try and solve the problem and try and do it before a startup runs out of funding. How can we do that within a certain set of constraints? And so I like to innovate, but just on one limited thing.
Yeah, I really like that advice because I think just having everyone learn new technologies rather than focusing on solving the problem is a huge issue. And also introducing one new thing actually allows you to innovate within the technical stack that you already know. So yeah, I think that's very good. So in a budget constrained environment, how should startups differentiate between a cost saving and a value driven tech decision?
I think the thing that comes to mind there is the classic build versus buy scenario. As engineers, we want the opportunity to build something, right? whether it's a new login system or a way to collect logs or distribute data globally or whatever it is, we enjoy those technical engineering challenges. And for a startup, those can be the thing that make or break a startup's ability to actually grow and be successful. And so I really look to what can we buy that is not the differentiator for our organization. If we're not building the next great user authentication system, then we shouldn't build it. There are plenty of great options out there that we can pay a monthly subscription for, a lot of fine tools. So those aren't the areas that we should be innovating and we should be building. So really focusing in on what is the business differentiator and let's focus there. And then outside of that, we just bolt on and bring in industry leading technologies to support the rest of it, but really focusing in on what is the business differentiator.
I really like this advice because I think you could waste a lot of time trying to build everything yourself, and yeah, and really pointless things that don't make a difference at all, and you're not innovating at all because you're just building something that's been done and other people can do better. Yeah, I think just building the one thing that is the main innovation that your company is doing is, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Brian, moving forward to a more personal dimension, could you share any significant hurdles that you faced in your journey, be it personal or professional, and how they've shaped your approach to technology and leadership?
Yeah, and I've been doing a lot of work over the past few years. I've hired multiple coaches to help me around mindset and the different things that we experience as engineers. I've joined and been actively participating in a number of different masterminds that really try and to help me to understand the ways that I think, the the challenges that I have, and how can I manage those as I continue to grow and find success in my career. I've absolutely dealt with the ideas of like imposter syndrome. For me, I was not the kid developing computer programs or games on my family's computer at 8 years old. It wasn't me, right? I didn't really get into computers and software until after I graduated from undergraduate. I just, that wasn't something that I gravitated to. And so I've certainly felt a lot of imposter syndrome. Heck, even being on having a conversation with you here today and knowing that it's going to be broadcast across the internet for all of time, that can introduce feelings of imposter syndrome. I've dealt with self sabotage, just holding myself back, restricting my growth because I didn't think that I was capable or I didn't think that I was the right person or any number of different things that I think many of us experience. And what's interesting is as you progress through your career, whether it's in technology or some other field, for me, I always thought that it would go away, right? As I got more experience, as I got more expertise, those things would go away. And really, all I've just learned to deal with them better, to recognize them sooner, but they're always still there. And for me now, I really leverage that to try and push myself further, push against my comfort zone. And by doing that, it's really brought some amazing opportunities into my life. And so I'm really grateful for it, but it's certainly taken a bit of work to really be able to recognize and understand what's going on. And then how can I work within?
Thanks very much for sharing your personal story. Yeah, I think like a lot of people watching you, they probably have imposter syndrome just listening to you, and they're like, "Oh my god, this guy like he knows everything about tech." And but to hear that you also have imposter syndrome and you've dealt with it, I'm sure it's going to inspire our audience.
I deal with it even still today. I've had important phone calls and meetings that I still walk into nervous about, am I going to mess it up? And so just recognizing it and how can I work with it?
Definitely. So apart from your professional achievements, what are some personal accomplishments or aspects of your life that you're particularly proud of?
Um, yeah, I've certainly had quite a few professional successes. On the personal side, I've really focused a lot on what are some of my personal goals. what do I want my life to look like from a personal perspective? What do I want my engagements with my family to look like? What is I want my relationship with my wife to look like, and really been conscientious and focused on that. And by measuring a lot of those things, like how many interactions do I have? I've really changed and been able to build the life that I wanted. So I really built the life by design. And so I'm really proud of that. I'm able to spend the a good amount of time with family. I'm able to go on some great adventures. One of my hobbies is around adventure travel. So I like to do rock climbing and whitewater rafting and mountain biking and skiing. And so I've had an opportunity to do all of those things, travel the world and go surfing. And so really, I'm very proud of that and continue to try and find new ways that I can explore and push myself and learn outside of my profession. Because a lot of the things that I learn outside of my profession, I'm then able to bring right into my profession and working with the different teams that I work with.
Definitely. I think personal growth is a huge contributor to professional growth because if you are not growing personally, your business is not it's only going to grow as much as you do. And I love that you're able to not only engineer the technical part of your life, you're also able to engineer the personal part of your life to be something the same thing that you envisioned. So finally, for our non-technical listeners aspiring to make sound tech decisions, what's one piece of actionable advice that you'd offer based on both your professional and personal experiences?
If it's all right, I might give one and a half
Sure.
pieces of advice. So, first big one, I think, is that technical or non technical, it's important to really validate what it is that you're building. Really get out there and talk to as many potential customers as possible before it's ready. So, before we even start writing code, before we even start building a user interface, talk to customers, understand what is it that we're building the right problem. Are they interested enough to actually pay money, and really validating that idea? And then my other kind of half piece of advice is to really find a strong technical partner that can help guide you through that process. And what I see most often with non-technical founders is that they kind of gravitate to the first person that sounds and looks technical. So they find that person that's willing to work for their startup for no money but equity only, and it's going to be huge. And so they find the person that may or may not be really qualified to help them out. And they just relinquish all control over to that person. And then things may or may not go to plan. So, really trying to find a strong technical partner that has your best interests at heart and not necessarily wanting to build the next cool, shiny thing. Because unfortunately, that typically those projects and those startups end up failing. They fall into that 70% of failed software projects. Yeah, that would be my advice.
Definitely, that's very good advice. Like finding a technical partner who you can trust because they're going to have your best interest because everyone's trying to build the big shiny thing, but the people who are going to succeed and the people who are going to fail, I think that a lot about what it's also very similar to what you said with the fact that if you're able to pivot and if you trust the other person and you're more likely to succeed than fail.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Brian, for sharing all of your expertise today.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great to be here.
Thank you.